The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defense chief, as well as a Hamas leader, Ibrahim al-Masri. This is for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Gaza conflict. You will, of course, remember that South Africa has a pending case at the International Court of Justice on this very issue. So what do those two arrest warrants mean for our case and our posture on what's unfolding in that part of the world? Vincent Magwenya is the presidential spokesperson and he joins us now on the line. Thank you, as always, for your time. Firstly, I suppose, a broad statement on the response to those ICC warrants, and what do you think this means for our case at the ICJ?
Thank you, Bongani, and good morning to your listeners. Well, Bongani, this is a significant step towards justice for crimes against humanity and war crimes in Palestine. It's a step that we welcome. It's also a step that will give hope to the people of Palestine, the women and children who are living under constant Israeli bombardment, that the international community has not abandoned its responsibility, that the international community has not abandoned them, as they live through this horrible time. Going forward, as you know, Bongani, South Africa, along with other countries, had submitted referrals to the ICC on the situation in Palestine. We are pleased that steps are being taken to once again ensure that international law is adhered to ensure that we can use peaceful legal instruments to put an end to that conflict. The matter in the ICJ continues. As you know, Israel is due to submit its response to our case in July of next year. So that is a separate process that is underway.
Yeah.
Obviously, there will be a case where information is shared across as these matters continue. On our side, we've collected sufficient evidence to show that Israel is committing war crimes, that Israel is committing genocide against the people of Palestine.
Vincent Magwenya, I've got a question for you. Does the concept of international law ring hollow, perhaps, because both the Israelis and the U.S. government yesterday rejecting the ICC's decision to issue those arrest warrants, particularly, of course, for Prime Minister Netanyahu and the former defense chief Yoav Gallant. This is in stark contrast, you might argue, to what they felt when the ICC issued arrest warrants for the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin. I don't need to explain our position on that, and it seems to me that depending on your alignment, each country more or less reacts according to the way they see the world when it comes to these kinds of decisions.
Well, the expectation, Bongani, is that when an ICC warrant has been issued, member states who are signatories to the Rome Statute have to act in accordance with international law. So in this particular case, Mr. Netanyahu and along those others who have warrants issued against them will not be able to travel to about 124 countries around the world. Or if they do go to those countries, they can expect those countries to do their part in observance of their obligations to the Rome Statute. So it doesn't ring hollow. It does have an impact. It does have an effect. How they've responded obviously is not surprising in this particular case. But this is a matter that is not new. I mean, the court, in this case the ICC, initiated an investigation in 2021. And at that time, when the investigation was initiated, Israel did not pursue any action towards seeking a deferral of the investigation. And so this matter has been ongoing for quite some time. The authorities in Israel have been aware of the ICC investigation, and I will think that even the American authorities have been equally aware of that investigation. As matters escalated, obviously the court paid more attention, or the prosecutor rather paid more attention to the matter, and so their reaction was not surprising. I suppose it's they're maintaining a position that they've maintained over this conflict, and we will continue on our side advocating for a peaceful resolution to that conflict. More importantly, for adherence to international human rights law and human rights principles,
All right.
where you can.
Vincent Magwenya, I think we'll leave it there. Presidential spokesperson there, very clear that the Americans and the Israelis are adopting the position they have consistently held on this issue. But I think my wider point is, depending on which way you dice it, countries react from their perspective. And I'll give you two names, Omar al-Bashir, and remember the cartwheels and the contortions we did to avoid Vladimir Putin landing on our shores because we didn't know what to do? Just think about that. Andre Thomashausen, who is an author and academic, but also a professor emeritus of international law with the University of South Africa. A very good morning to you. Thank you for your time. I'll start with that second question I posed to Vincent Magwenya. Does the concept of international law ring hollow simply because people follow or support or ignore matters based on their perspective and their foreign policy considerations?
Yes, good morning, Bongani. Good morning, listeners. I definitely would answer affirmative, and I agree with your last questions. I've often said on this radio and others, all this judicial activism hasn't saved a single life. It has remained irrelevant. And the main reason is that the nations that actually determine the fate of the world, they determine international relations, America, Russia, China, India, they have not joined the ICC, and they will definitely ignore these further pronouncements. The first objection, which the US have already formalized, is that the ICC does not even have jurisdiction over what an Israeli prime minister does or not does. It is the same argument that Russia used when they rejected the warrant against President Putin.
So what does the rest of the world do in a case like what we've seen unfolding in Gaza? Do we stand aside and watch?
Well, international law was never developed. It wasn't really written. It developed over the last 5,000 years as a small and very modest set of rules. For instance, not to do certain things because they might be done to you. If you use chemical warfare gas, then your enemy might also do it. So people have agreed in conventions not to do it. But there is no enforcement. There's no international government. There's no international parliament. There are bodies that consult and that talk to each other, fortunately, except in the Ukraine war case. The US have stopped. The West has stopped talking to Russia. So even the communication has broken down. And in our history, in the condition of humanity today, there is no way that we can secure the world against war crimes. We can try to talk about it. We can try to take action. But if the main powers, the powers that dominate the world economically and militarily, I say it again, America, Russia, China, and India, if they do not agree to be part of it, there is no ways that, for instance, South Africa, with 2 battalions ill-equipped in position in the DRC, could do anything to save anybody in Gaza.
So again, I pose the question. I mean, we've seen the conditions in Gaza. Part of what the court was saying yesterday was that in its finding that there were reasonable grounds to believe that blockade of food, water, electricity, medical supplies, fuel, all of that they are seeing as really part of aiming destruction at a civilian population. The world can't ignore that, surely.
It's not the court who says that. It's one prosecutor, Mr. Khan, who has a sword of pedophilia hanging over his head. He is saying this. A court hasn't made any finding. So, and of course, Israel says it is simply not true. The facts are not true. My biggest worry is the double standards here. People arrange this enormous, I call it a show, it's a clown act, a complete show over this conflict, and they say nothing about the conflict in Sudan, where over 2 million people have died, innocent civilian people, and amongst them, of course, the normal percentage of children. They say nothing about many other conflicts in the world, including in the DRC, where some historians reckon that so far 8 million Africans have died. Currently, we have on our doorsteps in Mozambique daily demonstrations, 40 dead people, and possibly a new civil war. And nobody takes any interest.
But
so
Prof,
there is double standards.
You surely couldn't compare the protests around an election result in Mozambique to what has unfolded in Gaza in the last year or so.
No, of course, the dimensions are different, but Mozambique has already had a civil war that lasted 14 years and killed about 1 million people. Not 20,000, not 30, not 40. And Sudan has taken a terrible toll. And that's just indifference. Maybe it's because it's African people that nobody cares.
Well, Professor Thomashausen, we'll have to leave it there with you. Thank you for your analysis, and I'll leave it to the listeners to respond. What are your thoughts on this? Is it a fool's errand, ultimately, however noble its ambitions, because the powerful nations, the ones that definitely wield might, simply ignore the ICC in the first place? But what does the rest of the world do? Stand aside and watch.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions,
your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.